I'm Peter Hart.
And I'm Gary Bain.
And together we're Pete and Gary's Military History
Podcast.
I say, Gary, do you like a chatter?
I do.
Do you like a natter?
I do.
Well, you'll like
Chatter Natter.
And today's guest, who is it? Who's our guest today? Go on, tell me.
It's our great friend Carole Hope today, Pete.
She loved, not Carole King then, like I said.
No, you did say Carole King. No, it's Carole Hope, and we're very lucky to be in a lovely home today.
See, it's palatial, isn't it?
It is.
Palatial.
I wish I could sing like Carole King.
Well, I bet you
We
wish
all
you-
wish we could sing like Carole King.
Bet you wish you had her money. And here's Luca just strolling past. How old is he, Carole?
17 and a half.
Oh, well, I hope he's still here when the podcast goes out.
I hope I'm still here when the podcast goes out.
I'm not so keen on that. I get 50 quid if you die early. Now, the way we'd like to start is just by tell us a bit about yourself, because you didn't spring full formed onto this earth as a distinguished military historian, did you? So what did you spend most of your life doing?
Right, well, when I left school, I went into the civil service, and from there I went into a big insurance PLC. Then I went into local government.
What were you doing in all these things?
And
What was your role?
And then I went into admin of a small business. So I've done across the spectrum, and to answer your question, Pete, it was administration mostly.
Ooh. Now, did you find that a fulfilling career? Did you enjoy it while you were doing it?
Yes and no. Yes and no.
What
It really,
planet are
a
you
lot
on?
of the time it depended on the team I was working with, and I think that's probably true of a lot of people in many occupations.
I'd have you down as a people person, Carole. Is that fair? We've been on lots of battlefield tours together, and you seem to get on with people very well.
Yes, I would say so, although it has been a kind of progression, because I believe it or not, Gary, I used to be painfully shy when I was younger.
Me too.
Gary was painfully shy. Gary won an international competition for the world's shyest person.
In Gallipoli.
In Gallipoli, yeah.
Oh, I don't
With this
believe it
absolute
was in
lunatic
Gallipoli.
woman who was the loudest. Anyway, so that's that. Right now, so when did you retire? What year would that be?
Oh, that's a good question, Pete.
Roughly.
Probably round about 2010.
Well, you were a writer before this, though. So forgetting the historian part, we'll come back to tours things, but you'd always liked writing stuff, hadn't you?
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
Words and things like that. Gary
Yeah,
would say.
absolutely. Yeah. I've always been a writer. So, I didn't mind writing essays for history and English literature at school. I was quite happy to write thank you notes for relatives, for presents.
I hated that. I used to sign my sister's one.
I would,
And me, Pete.
I would even do the best job I possibly could if I was writing a letter of complaints.
I used to correct the spelling in toilets. So similar start in life, Carole.
So the history. Had you retired by the time you started going on battlefield tours, and what made you go on the first one? Because it's not something normal people do, as we've discovered running a battlefield tour company.
No, I hadn't retired. I was still working, and the reason I went on the first one was because I was at the end of my Open University degree, and the last module that I studied for that covered the Second World War and the First World War, not so much from a military history point of view, but from a social and political history point of view. But it kind of got me, gave me a spark for interest in the military side. So I decided to have a go at a battlefield tour.
And did you know anyone else on the tour when you went on it, or did you just go?
The very first one I went on, I went with my ex-husband.
Oh, he's a swine. We never liked him, did we, Gary?
No, I went on a few battlefield tours with him.
Yeah, he's a lovely man, actually.
When was the first one? Was it Western Front?
It was
The
a
husband?
it was a leisure tour. Am I allowed to say that?
of course you are.
It was a leisure tour, and we did a whistle stop tour, introductory, one of their introductory whistle stops of the Ypres Salient and the Somme.
And did you enjoy it?
Yes, I did very much. Partly because some of the people were very sociable, so we had a good time from that point of view, but also because just the subject was engrossing.
That's right, it is, isn't it? We found that.
Yeah, we have. Now, some of the battlefield tours we've been on, you and I have been to Gallipoli together. We've been to Normandy, where we discovered our talents for camouflage by sticking our heads in a bush, as I recall.
We'll put that video up.
But some of the terrain, Gallipoli particularly, is difficult.
Yeah.
But you always had a go at stuff. Would you say that's in your nature to have a go at things?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can remember one of the very first tours I did on the Western Front. It was led by a chap called Tony Noyes. Some people out there might know that name. And it was in the Ypres Salient, and I can't remember the name of the site we were at, but he had ventured onto a really muddy patch of ground to get from A to B, and I was just about to follow him when he fell through into about 2 foot of really muddy, stinky, horrible, swirly stuff, and I just about managed to avoid it. Such was my eagerness to follow after him.
Well, if you can remember where that is, if you could let me know, I'd like to take Pete there.
Oh, looking forward to that.
I'm sure Andy would probably remember.
That's Andy Tom.
Andy Tom.
Yeah.
Now, who I believe is featuring in a future Chatter Natter. So,
Yes,
well,
so I understand.
Now, so what should we do? What should we talk about next? So you started going on battlefield tours. Did you join any of the associations concerned with?
Yeah, I joined the Western.
Was it particularly the Great War?
Yeah, it was.
See,
Yeah, I mean, I'd had an interest in the Second World War during my teens because my parents were of that generation. So as a child, I heard all about the air raid shelter stories and all that sort of thing. And I did actually do a lot of reading about the Second World War, but again, it was mostly from the political side rather than the military history side. But once I actually started visiting the battlefields, it was only First World War.
So that was the Western Front Association, and
So
that
then,
springs
yeah.
to mind, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, on the first tour, we went to Tockage, of course, at Poppering, and they had a leaflet there for the Western Front Association, so I picked it up and joined.
And so the Western Front Association, and did you go to meetings?
Not for a few years, no. I did venture to one, but didn't really find it very friendly, and that was kind of in the days when I was a bit more like a person who just stay in the background and wait for other people to approach me rather than be proactive. So it kind of put me off, but then eventually I started going.
Did you find it a male environment? If you see what I mean.
Yeah, mostly a male environment. Yeah.
Do you think
Until
that's changing?
recently, it is changing. Yeah, definitely it's changing. There's a bigger percentage of women going now. Mm.
That's good.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Well, I mean, you know yourself, Pete, when you've come to the Sussex branch, which I attended many years, quite a few women who attended that branch.
Yeah, it is good that the range of people is broadening, that take an interest in the Western Front. Now, so let's look at how you move towards your first book. What's the process? Because there you are, not much of an attender of the Western Front Association. What's the process that leads you towards writing your first book, which is worshipy, sausagey thing?
Worshipper and worshipped.
All right. worshipy, sausagey things as close as I ever got.
It sticks in my mind because I've served under a few priests.
I bet you are. Hey, you were going in for the priesthood at one point, weren't you?
I was, yes.
Now, so yeah, the book's Worshipper and Worshipped. I'm pretending because, of course, I reviewed that book. I remember it well. It occupied me a fair time reading it at 741 pages. But let's get on the book later. Let's talk about the writing process and what made you want to do it, because it is a big step for anyone to write their first book.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, by this time, I'd started going a bit more to meetings, and I acquired a copy of the first biography of Father Doyle, which was published in 1919 by a fellow Jesuit.
What was that called, if you remember? It's terrible to be put on the spot, so...
Yeah.
We'll put a posting up of the other reading. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you know? I can't remember.
Was it a rattling good read? Look, these Jesuits, they've got some interesting habits, I'll tell you. We'll come on to some of them later on.
Well, it was 500 and something pages, Peter, and the last, say, off the top of my head, 180 pages were his war service. I read that. The rest of it, I just kind of turned page after page, quickly skimming through.
Gasp.
When was this, Carole?
This was 2000. I think it was 2006 or 2007, something like that.
So that's quite a long time ago.
It is quite a long time ago.
And was that what gave you the idea?
Well, yeah. I mean, having acquired this biography, it was suggested to me that this would make a good subject for a talk to the Western Front Association.
Who suggested that?
That was Andrew again.
Andrew Tone, he seems to feature a lot.
So Andy gave me the book and suggested maybe it might be a good subject for a talk to the WFA. And then, having read the back of the book, The War Service Only, I decided that I really liked the sound of this character, the fact that he was such an engaging writer, and the fact that these letters were written directly from the Western Front and sent home. So it was really good primary source material. So I decided to have a go at doing my own biography.
And did you have a religious bent at all? Was it
No.
was the attraction that he was a religious man?
No. And in fact, part of the problem with writing it and promoting it ever since is the fact that I am wary of the fact that I'm not religious, and you know, I'm conscious of maybe I might be treading on toes. You've got to be very careful with how you phrase things.
I remember that because I remember my review. I had to be edited because I'd offended some of your readership in my forthright descriptions of the character of this man.
But it just seemed a good project, really, to begin with. I mean, I don't really know to begin with whether I seriously thought I would publish it, but because I'd always wanted to write a book, and in my head it was always going to be a fiction book, but never really got the spark for a novel. I had a few ideas for novels, but could never really think the plot through. So I just decided, well, here's a story that's already presented to me. I know what the story is. I've just got to kind of try and write around it.
Now, how did you find a publisher?
That's a good question. I think it's because the actual publisher attended the Sussex branch WFA, and at the time was heavily into promoting his publishing service.
Who did publish it, Carole?
It's Revive Press, which is an imprint of Tommy's Guides.
All right. And So how much help did you get from your publisher in writing? Because as you know, I get loads of help in writing my books, not just from friends who are amazing, but also from copy editors and proof checkers and the rest of it. How much of a help to a new author did Reveille Press give you?
Well, I mean, the website is helpful. Lots of guidelines on the website, and if I was to email with a query, I always got a response. But as far as things like, for example, if I wanted any proofreading done, I would have to pay extra for it. But the publisher would source that for me in the index. He would source it for me, but I would have to pay for it. So.
Ooh. Yeah, I get the picture. Now, how did you choose and this, I'm trapping you here, I'm going to say it before I start. How did you choose what material to leave in and what to take out?
Yeah, that is a trap, isn't it? Yeah, well, as you know,
the word
Peter.
741 should be a clue.
Yeah, well, as you know, Peter, I suppose maybe I didn't really have that much confidence in how it would sell anyway, so I just decided to ignore all the advice. All the advice was to pitch it to a certain readership, and
you mean either religious lunatic
or the military
mostly
history, and of course my book does both, so it falls between the two stools really, because it's not totally focused on one or the other. It's both.
Now, as you now, Gary hasn't read this book, so that's why I'm sort of taking the lead on this. Gary, for some reason, I think.
Well, also, you never let me get a word in edgeways.
That is the reason. Bastard. I hate him. As you're writing it and you're doing all of it, and I know what I think of it, but he's a funny man.
Yeah.
And I don't mean funny ha-ha. He's definitely strange in some of his beliefs and actions, and some of the things, if you were to describe them, especially the flagellation stuff and the nettles, I always remember the nettles.
But is he strange, or is it the Jesuit sect, for want of a better word?
I was trying not to be well, both in my view, but I think possibly some of our listeners might take offence. Let's keep it to him. But did you find him strange in some of his belief systems that were very strong?
Well, yeah, I suppose I did, but I mean, what I put it down to is you've got to remember that this man was born in 1873 in the Victorian era. We're now looking at him from a perspective of the 21st century. He was born in the 19th century. That's right, isn't it? Right. Yeah. So he was born in to a Catholic family, a devout Catholic family, in Ireland. So and he had a Jesuit education. So when you look at it in those terms, is it really that peculiar? It's peculiar to us, but he was a man of his times.
That's brilliant. That's entirely what I was trying to say, but failing miserably.
I do remember one of his quotes, and I'm just reading it here, and it was, "In spite of all the misery and suffering caused, this war will turn out to have been the biggest act of God's love, saving the souls of scores of poor fellows." So scores of poor fellows will be saved, so the war's all right. I find him really weird.
Yeah, well, again, the thing is that's a personal letter written to a member of his family who would know where he was coming from. And the thing as well you've got to that you can bring into the equation is that pre-war his job, if you like, as a member of the Jesuit order was to be a missioner and a leader of retreats. Now, missions were something that occurred in a church, and anybody from the general population could go to a mission that was conducted over a number of days usually. A retreat was something a bit more upmarket, if you like, and it was generally only middle class people that went on retreats. And his ambition pre-war had been to bring retreats to the working man, and he only managed to run a retreat for working men once before he became a chaplain. And I think probably in his head he's thinking, well, you know, he can provide this service as part of his army chaplaincy.
And when did he join the army?
Well, he volunteered in November 1914, but he didn't actually get his commission until a year later, November 1915. And I think that may have been partly to do with recruitment to the 16th Irish Division. Maybe it was a bit slower than other divisions, and also I think it was the case that his employers, if you like, wanted to hold on to him for as long as possible.
Now, the book does go into some detail about the role that he fulfilled as a chaplain in the army. In a recent podcast, we used the phrase, I've forgotten the phrase.
If only I'd...
But sort of hedging your bets with God just before you go into battle.
Celestial insurance policy.
Yeah. Thank you, Pete. And that is a large part of the role, it strikes me, with Father Doyle.
I'm still laughing at that unforgettable phrase.
That unforgettable phrase I forgot, yeah. Do you think that was his role when he went into the army? Forget all the other stuff that Pete puts in his review. It strikes me that he very clearly understood what the role of the chaplain was.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that really just harks back to what I was just saying about how he wanted to reach out to the ordinary rank and file men in the army.
And he's brave, isn't he? But in the letters he comes across as brave.
Well, it's not so much the letters, it's the first-hand testimony after his death. There's loads of first-hand testimony after his death to say how brave he was. And that's the reason for the title of the book, because he was a worshipper of God, but apparently the men absolutely worshipped the ground that he walked on.
741 pages now, managed not to notice that.
I mean, I
never thought of that.
That's an actual quote from someone, that the men worshipped the ground that he walked on.
And he did get as far forward as he could, didn't he? Into as close to the front line as he possibly could.
Oh, yeah. A couple of times he was told to... he wasn't allowed to go any further forward, but he always went as far forward as he could when circumstances allowed, and that's why in the end ultimately he was killed.
Now he was with the 8th Royal Irish Fusiliers, and then he was with the 8th Dublin Fusiliers, and that's important for your second book, if you see what I mean. But the letters, and what attracted you first is the quality of his writing in those letters, isn't it? Because he does give I mean, I've read them and I really liked him, and he also comes across as a really likeable bloke as well, contrary to his earlier writings, where he doesn't come across, to my mind, as particularly likeable. His letters home and the letters from the front are good, aren't they? They're interesting.
They are very interesting, yeah, and amusing in a lot of cases, and self-deprecating, I think, in a lot of cases. Whereas before you might not have thought that of him in the earlier letters that you read. Certainly the ones home from the front, that's the case.
The Gary, you've never been self-deprecating, have you? Can't really say it, can you?
No, I'm glad you've come to me. I mean, one of the problems that strikes me, Carole, is that he is a likeable man. He does have a sense of humour, but he does seem to think that everything's preordained, and that God is sort of creating the path. And indeed, at one point, he believes he's got a guardian angel, doesn't he, looking after him? Yeah,
I mean, I suppose that's a bit of a joke, really, because it was only subsequently that I found out that the usual Christian tradition is that you have 2 forenames, or 2 Christian names. In the Catholic faith, a lot of the time they'll have a 3rd name, which is a name that they're given on either baptism or confirmation. And so Gabriel was his baptismal or confirmation name. I'm not sure. I think it was the baptismal name. So yeah, he made a joke of the fact that the angel Gabriel was looking over him.
Didn't do a very good job, did he?
Ultimately, no.
To a point.
No.
To a point in about, what, 1917? Perhaps he was on his holidays. You go into considerable detail with supporting testimony, descriptions, accounts about his death. How do you feel about the way he was killed and just what happened to him? Because you must have developed a real personal feeling towards him.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose a bit like you, really. I suppose in the end it's a bit of an anticlimax, because here's this chap who's always managed to avoid even a wound as such. He was very lucky on one occasion when a box of Very Lights exploded in a headquarters dugout, and he'd literally left there a few hours beforehand, and in the dugout at the time there were 7 or 8 officers of the battalion, all of whom were wounded, and he had left there a couple of hours
probably his fag
previously.
as he was leaving. Probably left, just saw, see you lads.
I'd just like to paraphrase what Carole said there. She started that with a bit like you, really. A bit of an anticlimax.
Yes, I noticed that. Is she meaning my career as a glorious oral historian?
No, thinking it's an anticlimax that this chap, who had avoided so many dangers before, got through so many scrapes before, was convinced that, he had a guardian angel looking after him. And then in the end he gets killed.
And where was he killed?
He was killed in front of a dugout along by the ruler's railway line, the Ypres ruler railway line.
So they'd moved up to the Flanders area.
Yeah.
And that's 16th of August.
So it's 16th of August, yes. This is on the Fretzenberg Ridge. I never know whether I've pronounced that right. Friesenberg.
Me and Gary think it was perfect. I don't think that's any reassurance for you.
Yeah, so he had been manning, with the medical officer, he had been manning an aid post, which was actually just glorified gun pits. So shallow gun pits, and the attack kicked off, I can't remember, the early hours of the morning, 4 o'clock, something like that. I can't quite remember. And about 9 o'clock, the enemy were spotted counter-attacking. So the commanding officer told Father Doyle and the medical officer that they had to vacate the aid post and go back behind the lines, which they did. But I don't know of the exact timing, but probably a couple of hours later, Father Doyle decided that he couldn't stay. He had to get back to the front line, so he went back to the aid post, which was now just being run by a corporal. And a message came in that there were a couple of officers that had been wounded in the front line by the railway line. So Father Doyle and his servant went out to try and give them aid, rescue them. One of them had been killed, but one of them was still alive. So they dragged him back to a pillbox, and unluckily a shell exploded nearby, and the officer and Father Doyle were killed by the shell, but his servant was okay.
Who was uncomplaining.
Now, the there were efforts after his death to get him a VC, which is fairly standard for these people who die. There's usually a campaign. How do you feel about that? Do you think he deserved one, or do you just think it's just things they do?
Yeah, I don't know.
You don't engage it terribly. You seem to want him to get a VC, but you wouldn't expect him to now, would you?
Well, see, the difficulty is that if you research the VC, as I recall, it's only supposed to be awarded, or it was at the time, only supposed to be awarded for a single action.
In the presence of the enemy.
So yes, so any cumulative actions didn't qualify. Now, if you look at the VC for another chaplain, Theodore Bailey Hardy, you will find that his VC citation references actions on about 3 different days for the award of the VC. So if you take that and apply it to Father Doyle, the reason I think maybe he might have deserved a VC when you compare it to Hardy is that in the 2 weeks that the Royal Dublin Fusiliers were in the front line, and I'm not just talking about the 8th Battalion, I'm talking about the 9th Battalion and the 2nd Battalion as well, but or the 48th Infantry Brigade, shall we say, that in the front line leading up to the 16th of August, Father Doyle actually stayed in the front line even when his own battalion went back to the rest camp, because the other chaplain of the brigade, Father Frank Brown, had been called back to the Irish Guards, which was his original regiment, and no one came to take his place. So Father Doyle stayed in the front line with the men of the 9th Royal Dublin Fusiliers when the 8th Royal Dublin Fusiliers went back. So he had no rest and was putting himself at risk. So if you look at it kind of from that point of view, plus the action of going out actually on the 16th of August to try and aid the 2 officers that were in distress, 1 killed, 1 wounded, and try and bring them back to safety, then maybe, yes, perhaps he did deserve the VC.
It is a lottery, isn't it, sometimes?
But it is a lottery, yeah. I mean, I don't subscribe to the view of, what do you call it? Retrospective, yeah.
I don't think any of us do we?
Well done.
It's ridiculous. Now, I know when I read the book, eventually I was on his side. I 500 pages of hating him, but he won me over with his letters, as he won you over. And it is a great book. It's an interesting book. I believe you've announced plans to edit it and do what you're told in the first bloody place, if you see what I mean. Is that true?
Well, I'd like to have a go at it. The only problem is...
Go at what? Just explain for them, because I'm editing it down, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is I have started, so what I've done is I now have a file just of his letters, his war letters, but that file is 88,000 words on its own. So the second book, the Frank Laird book, is something like 110,000 words in total. So if you've got 88,000 words of Father Doyle's letters, it doesn't give you an awful lot of scope to write context around, to try and keep it to a decent size. So perhaps I'm going to have to do, even more severe editing of the actual letters.
Choppy.
We could help with that.
It sounds good. I hope you do manage to do it, because I think the book as it is great, but I think as a military person, military interests, I think I'd prefer to see it just about his wartime service.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now this led you towards your second book, didn't it? Now I've left my notes behind, so Gary's going to guide us through this. Gary likes to take over things, and I know Gary has read and enjoyed this book enormously, so he'll be able to provide his own insights into it. So over to you, Gary, and over to you, Carole, about the second book. What's that called, and who gave you the idea for the title?
It's called Frank Speaking, and the two gentlemen sitting in front of me gave me the idea for the title.
Now, we said frankly.
You did say frankly, yeah, but I thought Frank was better.
Well,
now for this book, Carole, you've taken a different route to the publishing, haven't you?
I have, yes. I totally self-published it myself, yes.
And it's H&K Publishing.
Yes, Hope and Night.
Oh,
Hope.
So not the night part of it, well, one assumes your listeners know that the hope part of it is me, and the night part of it is Lindsay Knight, who
Never heard of her.
works with Taff.
Who works with Taff and did the
Taff Gillingham.
Taff Gillingham, and did the design for the dust cover and the designs inside.
Now, more and more people are taking this route because they're unwilling to entrust their life's work, as it often is, to the and I'm using Pete's notes here, the grubby hands of small publishers.
I would never have said anything like that. I love small publishers.
Why did you decide to do it differently this time, and on a generic basis, not for any specific reason, but just why? Because it's hard work, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Well, number one, it's a challenge. Number two, it gave me complete control over the project. And as part of number two is the fact that I had a fixed idea about how I wanted it presented. So I didn't want to have to conform to the house style of a particular publisher, whereas with the first one it didn't make much difference either way. With the second one, I wanted to conform to a particular style and not the house style of a publisher.
Now, it also means, of course, that you've got to sell the book, Carole.
Yes.
So, was that a decision because some of the publishers do simultaneous remaining and selling to cut-price bookshops? Are you trying to avoid that in doing this?
Well, yes, there is an element of that, of course, because this book can always be printed on demand. So, for example, I have 4 copies left of my original print run. I can put in an order this afternoon when you've gone and say I need another 50, and the printer will run them off. Of course, I've got to pay for them, which then means
you've got to sell them.
Yes, exactly. So I'm always I'm always paying out before I can recoup anything. So that would put a lot of people off, wouldn't it?
It would.
But if you're at a stage of life like I am, where you're retired and you've got a certain amount of disposable income, well, I could go to the bookies and use some of that disposable income there. I could spend all day in the pub, I could be on the golf course, I could be doing all sorts of things with
You've just described Gary's life.
But equally, you could waste it, Carole.
With my disposable income. But I've decided to use my disposable income to do this instead. So hopefully I won't end up too much out of pocket. Hopefully I might even be in credit one day. But
I have seen you in the pub and the bookies, to be fair.
Now, what's Frank Speaking about? Frank Speaking.
Yeah, the subject of the book is called Frank Laird. And Frank Laird was a 35-year-old, mild-mannered civil servant working in the Dublin Metropolitan Police Court when war broke out in 1914. Well, when I was researching the Father Doyle book, there are some studies by Irish authors, one in particular, Miles Dungan, where he does a kind of Lost Voices type of book. So takes various themes and runs with that. But but not an in-depth study, if you know what I mean. So Frank Laird's name came up a few times in those books, and then I think I might have Googled him, and I found that there was this unfinished memoir.
It's a very rare book, isn't it?
It is a very rare book.
And it was by Frank Laird.
Yes. What happened was, having survived the war, I don't know exactly what year, but sometime in the early 1920s, he was asked to give a talk at the his local branch of the Old Comrades Association about his experiences as a prisoner of war. So he obviously wrote up the circumstances that led to his capture by the Germans and his experiences as a prisoner of war for this talk. Having done that, his wife then suggested to him that he write up all of his experience. So he then went back to 1914, started from the beginning, and was working his way towards March 1918 when he was taken prisoner of war. But unfortunately, he died. He took ill and died before he joined the two up. So there's a gap in the memoir between the end of the Battle of Messines in June 1917 and his the circumstances of his being taken prisoner of war in March 1918.
Now this is based on personal experiences of the Great War, an unfinished manuscript published shortly after his death.
Yes, by his wife.
That's the name of it, is it?
That's the name of it. So if anybody's interested, you can look that up on Google, presumably.
You won't get one. I've looked.
No, but I will say, although this might affect my all those book sales that are flooding in at this very moment, but I would say that if you do Google it, you will find that there is a transcription available online for a very small amount of money.
We'd rather have the original.
From
you.
I was going to say, is it too late to ask for my money back?
You haven't paid any.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, but you would only get Frank Laird's transcription.
You wouldn't get Carole's
You
insights.
No, that's
and
true.
you wouldn't get to know what happened to him between June 1917 and March 1918.
Exactly, Carole. Now we're introduced to him. We get an early look at his background, but we're really interested in his role in the Great War. And he's recruited into D Company of the 7th Royal Dublin Fusiliers, isn't he?
Indeed he was, yes.
They're a fine body of men.
Now we follow them through their training, which they do in Ireland, in the exotic sun-drenched fields of Basingstoke after that.
Yep.
He's sun-drenched.
Before they board the Alunia for the long voyage out to Mytilene, is it?
Yeah,
I've no idea how you pronounce
now,
that.
this is where the excitement begins, isn't it, Carole?
it is, yes.
So, tell us what happens once they're there. So, they land at Suvla on the 7th of August, don't they?
Yes, so they land at Nibracini or Nibracini Point.
Nibranesi. Or there's lots of ways to pronounce it.
Whatever. Point on the 7th of August 1915. Which of course is the south of Suvla Bay. They were originally supposed to land at the north, at the top end, but some kind of circumstances, I can't quite remember.
They worried about mines.
Meant that they had to land in the south.
Now, you name check various characters throughout, and there's some wonderful quotes from Henry Hanna, whose book also focuses on D Company, and it's called The Pals at Suvla Bay, which I think
I've got
got a copy.
That costs a fortune. That really costs a fortune as well, as you know. And I have an original copy which costs so much that my naughty daughter, as they say, my bad daughter, I've got two, wanted me to hand over a whole book collection to her because when I die, she wants to sell it. based on that one. It's well over £100.
Yeah, well,
but you could get a reprint for a tenner.
We've got a copy of the original as well. It's a lovely book. The illustrations in it are wonderful.
Now, there's other material also from the history of the 10th Irish Division, which further helps story flow, and it explains the bigger picture, doesn't it? Because it's not just about him on Suvla Bay, is it?
No. Although I do mainly only focus on D Company, 7th Royal Dublin Fusiliers. I do bring some other units into the picture.
Well, you explain what's happening, don't you?
Yeah, as and when you need it to progress the story. But I'm not trying to give an overall history of the landings at Suvla. I'll leave that to Peter.
Yeah.
So what happens to Frank Laird?
Lucky Frank, they used to call him. Lucky Frank. What could have gone wrong? What happens?
Well, first of all, along with his comrades, he has to embark on a long trek around the Salt Lake because they landed at the wrong point. So instead of landing at the top, which would mean they'd have a straight line kind of thing to get to Chocolate Hill, where the previous divisions, the 11th Division who had gone before them, were fighting. So now they've got to go on this long trek along the shoreline and around the Salt Lake.
Which was dry.
Yeah, and we'll put up either a picture or a map, won't we, to help people understand. Yes, you will, Peter.
Oh, well.
So, I mean, he didn't actually take part in the fighting for Chocolate Hill because the previous units that had preceded them were taking part in the fighting for that. But he was doing things like carrying ammunition and scattering it along the ground, him and some of his comrades, so that troops that might either be coming back or going forward would be able to retrieve the supplies. And then on the 9th of July, 2 days after landing, he was sheltering in a ditch and got hit by a sniper. So the bullet went into his, can't remember which way round it is now, but went into his, I think it was his right shoulder, and affected his lungs and his rib cage.
Now he's evacuated off of...
Yes, so now he's got a long wait for stretcher bearers to evacuate him back to the beach. And then eventually he gets into the tented hospital at Lemnos.
And then back to the UK?
And then, on a ship, the Cawdor Castle, back to the UK.
And he recovers?
He recovers, and then he's sent on home duty in Dublin to Wellington Barracks. And it's there that he witnessed the Easter Rising. The Royal Barracks. So on Easter Monday, day off he went with some chums, intending to go for a walk up the Dublin mountains.
Oh, a walk.
And en route, they met some soldiers who were, I think they weren't soldiers, they were volunteer corps coming back from the Dublin mountains, warned them that the uprising was taking place. They'd had intelligence of it, not to go any further. So he retreated back into Dublin, didn't make it as far as Royal Barracks because of the intensity of the fighting, and went into Wellington Barracks. And he saw out the rest of the Easter Rising in Wellington Barracks, during which time I think he was promoted from private to corporal.
The most important promotion in a man's life.
Yeah, but he probably only had it once.
Yeah. The really supremely good soldiers are promoted 2, 3, 4 times from private.
They are, yes. Now, he applied for a commission, didn't he, in the Army Service Corps?
Yes, he
What
did.
happened there?
I think they saw through him there.
Yeah, it was oversubscribed apparently, so he ended up in the poor bloody infantry.
And in July 1916, he was posted for training to the Officers' Cadet Battalion at the Curragh.
Yes, indeed he was, yes.
So, in January 1917, where does he get dispatched to, for want of a better word?
Yeah, so having disembarked at Tartler, I think he spent one night there and then was sent on the train to the Ypres salient, to the quiet zone in the Messines area.
And who was he serving with then?
So now he's in the 8th Royal Dublin Fusiliers.
Oh, that's the same one as Father Doyle.
Exactly, yes.
Hence your, and that's the connection.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about each other?
In Frank Laird's book, in his memoir, yes, he references Father Doyle a couple of times.
Does Doyle mention Laird in his letters?
No.
Oh.
No. Oh, I know.
Now again, he's relatively humorous, isn't he, Frank Laird?
Yeah.
It's a good read.
Yeah. Humorous in a different way to Father Doyle, because Father Doyle was also very amusing, but Frank Laird's got a very wry, understated sense of humour, and sometimes you read something and it doesn't quite connect, and then about 20 seconds later you giggle because you realise what it is he said.
Now, there are gaps in Frank Laird's original manuscript, aren't there, Carole? So how did you fill those gaps?
Yeah, well, there's one big gap.
Yeah.
So
Gary.
It's not the size of the gap, it's what you do with it.
Well, there were three sources, really. There was the Battalion War Diary.
So dull and made up.
There was Frank Laird's personal file held at the National Archives, and luckily I'd already taken photographs of the contents of that some years before I started really writing it all up, so lockdown didn't affect me on that. And then of course there was Father Doyle's letters, because a lot of what Frank Laird would have experienced would have been was described by Father Doyle during that period.
And what did you find out from these various sources?
Well, I found out that, for example, the Battalion War Diary told me that Frank Laird was wounded on the 10th of August 1917 by shell fire.
So that's 6 days. My photographic memory may be causing me some trouble here. 6 days before
the Battle of Langemarck.
6 days before Thingy was killed.
Yes.
Thingy?
Well, my photographic memory let me down badly for the name of Father Doyle.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a period when, I mean, you had Third Deep started the 31st of July, and of course didn't make the gains that it was supposed to make, and then you had another couple of.
I found this bit of the book fascinating because what happened to 16th Div and the story melds with 16th Div, and they're really badly treated. They're used as working parties. Yeah. They're in the line. They're holding the line. They're working parties, and then they have to go over the top.
Parties.
And then they have to go over the top, and then they do badly, and everybody says.
Exactly.
And it is quite hard on them, and this is very much part of the whole story.
And if you look at their starting strength, I mean, you look at the strength of the battalions after the battle, but you look at the strength of the battalions before the battle, it's a real eye-opener. Yeah, so during that period that Peter said, when they're backwards and forwards from the front line to camp, and even when they're back at camp, they only stay there sometimes 24, 36 hours before they're back to the front line again. They're used as burial parties, carrying parties. They sustain lots of casualties from shell fire, gas, sickness, you name it. And it's during this period, as you say, that Frank Laird is now hit by shrapnel, and he gets a wound in his head.
Doesn't sound good. You'd be all right, Gary, but most of us would. That would give us a lot of trouble. Now we'd better crack on a bit because I'm keeping an eye on the clock. But what happens next to it? So basically, he's out again.
So he's out again, yeah. And as I say, from now on until March, I don't really know what happened to him, other than the fact that he's recuperating, and I know that when he signed off to go back into active service, he was at a location in Grimsby, so you can kind of
I can see why he wanted to
He'd
get
want to
out.
get out of
He wants to
Grimsby.
get back to the front, wouldn't he? Now he goes out to I've forgot what it is. It's the
20th Entrenching Battalion.
It's an entrenching battalion, and it's clear. I mean, I'm not surprised, but it doesn't do it because he's had 2 bad wounds already.
Yeah.
But then all hell breaks loose, and it's every man to the front. He's sent forward to the regular battalion. Is it the second? First Royal Dublin Fusiliers, and he lasts with them exactly.
Well, hardly any time at all, really, because
it's a matter of hours, isn't it?
Yeah, the process is that they're retreating from Perone, which is where they were building the railway, back across the old Somme battlefields into those areas, and they were told that the First Royal Dublin Fusiliers were at Bray, so they make their way towards Bray. Then when they get there, they're told that they've now got to retreat because of the advances that the Germans are making, so they retreat, and it's only during that retreat that they meet up with some of the First Royal Dublin Fusiliers, not all of them, so then they reform with the men that they've met up with, and start advancing towards the Germans, and it's during this spell of fighting that he gets wounded again, and this time it's another gunshot wound, and it's to his side, and it's the opposite side to the first one.
So and he's captured.
And he's captured, and nearly everyone that he was advancing with were either killed or they were wounded and captured.
Now the next part of the book, and to the end of the book, is really his experiences in a variety of German prisoner of war camps.
Yeah.
But the main one, and this is an interesting bit of the story, because this is back in his own words, isn't it? This is the bit he wrote for the talk that he presented. Yeah. And I've forgotten the name of the place,
Schweidnitz.
That's why I didn't want to say it. And that bit's it's an exciting bit of the book, although not much happens, I'll be honest with you. But it's interesting how it's just a typical prisoner of war story. You either like it or you don't. I was watching, as it happened, Coldit's story whilst I was reading it. You could see the same things happening almost, not the escape plans, but the rest of it. This is an interesting bit of the book, I think. How did you enjoy writing that bit, or not writing, but providing the background detail for it?
Yeah, I did. I enjoyed.
You enjoyed all of it, didn't you?
Yeah, I enjoyed doing all of it. But doing the extra research for the prisoner of war stuff was quite interesting. I mean, the Hague Convention and the some of the backstory to the prisoner of war escapes was quite interesting. Now
he's eventually released back into, and he gets home, I can't remember,
December 18th.
So it takes a while for it all, and then it's the one of those anticlimaxes, isn't it? He goes back to work, and then he dies. Now I was thinking, well, all those wounds, but actually he seems to have died from something unrelated, although the stress and everything else might have caused it. But he didn't die from these wounds, does he?
No. Well, look, I got a hold of the death certificate, and according to the death certificate, he had bowel cancer.
Right, so that I found that that's quite sad.
Yeah.
It is sad because he was still only 40 odd.
Yeah. I can't remember the exact age, but early 40s. Yeah.
Now, and then the book finishes with you look at the story in the round, you look at some of his old comrades, you look at the reunions they have, and I think this adds quite a nice touch to the book. And the book, it's had some very good reviews from people besides me. I mean, who clearly am a friend of yours, but Taff Gillingham's given it a good review. I think Chris Baker's given it a good review, and these are names that are respected. So I hope people will think to buy it. You can only buy it by going to the internet, and I'm going to read it out and I'll put it on the podcast notes. You get it from carole.s.hope. That sounds familiar now. At btinternet.com. So she's got no exact imagination about her internet provision. And you could buy it, and it costs bugger all, basically, 22 quidish or something like that.
It's £20, but I have to charge for postage and packaging
22
as well.
quid.
Yeah.
And it's well worth it, and I hope you have lots of sales. Last question, really, is what next for you, Carole? Getting out to the battlefields, I expect. We all hope to go to Gallipoli, but...
that just still seems a distant dream, doesn't it?
It does seem a bit...
As far as writing is concerned, I will try and do something with the Father Doyle, and then there was also quite an interesting officer in the Frank speaking story called George Evelyn Cowley, who was a bit of a maverick, and there are papers pertaining to him at the University of Nottingham. So I'd quite like to go up there and have a look and see if there's going to be
strange in them parts.
See if there be enough material there for a book.
Although is that Cornwall?
You'll probably find he was a corporal several times.
So that's the next project then. Well, I look forward to that. I hope it comes out. Well, thank you very much, Carole.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Absolutely wonderful. It's been a true pleasure. And remember, do you like a chatter, Gary?
I do.
Do you like a natter?
I do.
Well, together we're Chatter Natter.